All right, looks like we are live. Let me run through all the streams real quick and make sure everything's running, guys. Hope you all had a good weekend. Look at that. Even Entropy had the volume down. It's amazing. Amazing. All right. Let's move some stuff around for my own convenience. Yeah, actually, Holly, speaking of you missing us on Sunday, Tank got a hold of me and was like, he's like, dude, probably coming in hot. I'm like, we're not streaming today, man. Are we streaming today? Because I was pretty sure we weren't. I thought you were on vacation. Uh, and he's like, oh, well, that's better. Because he's like, I got a bunch of stuff to do. So I think he was leaving like today or something. And I mistook that. But Holly, you'll be with me Wednesday. And I actually already created the stream. And all I got to do is go through StreamYards a little bit and figure out essentially how Tank has all the backgrounds and banners and whatever else going on. I'm just not. I don't use StreamYards, so I'm just not familiar with it. But I can do that behind the scenes pretty easily. And of course, I messaged you, Holly. If you check your Discord, you can text me though. That's an easier way to get a hold of me than whenever I'm in Discord. Because usually, if I'm in Discord, I'm in it on my phone and I'm just grabbing memes from various servers I'm in. I don't really engage in Discord that much. Um, but yeah, if you have time tonight or tomorrow, we'll figure it out. But just for a little bit, I only maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we can chat, talk about the show, and make sure everything works fine. But yes, Holly Midlife will be my guest on Wednesday night over on the Ends Justify the Memes. And with that, guys, some housekeeping. I probably won't be streaming, but today and tomorrow. Now I'll be streaming Wednesday night over on the Ends Justify the Memes, but here I probably won't be streaming. My wife has a big deal for her organization that they're trying to close, and it has to be done in Washington because whatever dog and pony shows. And so we're gonna be. It's be the first time I've been in DC in probably a year or more. I'm trying to remember if I was there last July or not, because I feel like we went to a Fourth of July party there, but I might not have been. That might have been the year before. It's hard to say. Um, but if we were at a Fourth of July party there, then it was actually in Virginia, not in DC itself. So I can't remember. In any case, probably won't stream on Thursday or Friday because of that, but I might. I might. So if I do, I will have to do it through a laptop, which is the bigger problem, which means I might have to use my ancient laptop to do it. So who knows how that's going to work out? Or I might be able to use my wife's if she is not using it during her meetings, during her work, and whatever else they're trying to accomplish. But I doubt that's the case either. So what I'll have to do is grab my cam and my laptop, and again, my laptop's. I guess I could turn it off, but I like to keep it on and plugged in because the battery will go dead and whatever else. I need a new laptop's the bottom line for these kinds of purposes. But you'll see because I'll have it figured out. And it'll either be posted or it won't, or you'll get the notification if I go live or not if you guys do the notification bell. Um, so yeah, if again I do, I'm gonna have to do it through my laptop. I have OBS on there; it'll run it, but it'll probably crap out. Also, I'm probably gonna have to bring a landline if I can even do that. So I'd be in a hotel. It's going to depend on their Wi-Fi. It just is not good circumstances in any way, shape, or form for me. But I do believe that I could stream from StreamYards pretty basically, as it's pretty light. It's internet-based instead of using OBS as I normally do. Though it might just have to be limited to YouTube unless I figure out how to do all the restreaming through StreamYards, which, sure, I mean, that works too. In any case, guys, so that is that, I suppose. Been doing a lot of scriptural reading and contemplation and looking into the early church fathers this weekend. Nothing I haven't read before, but refreshing myself and coming, because I've been coming into a lot of questions and with certain individuals and thoughts they present. And it's not like I want to be close to their ideas, but I just don't know. I don't know if they have it right. And the more I read, the more I find that seemingly what I believe seems, and I know this is a problem with confirmation bias, but I'm saying I'm trying to find stuff that denies what I believe, and I have been, and there's stuff I found, some quotes and whatever else that could maybe be misconstrued that way, and until you read it in the totality of what these people wrote. So it's it's very different. And I think the question I've had with the Orthodox Church, again, not saying that they're bad or anything, comes back to what I find a lot with Orthodox and Catholics is they always go back to, they act like the church started in the 5th century, the 4th or 5th century, and completely forget the 250 years of Christianity before that. So I've been watching a lot of stuff, a lot of sermons, been reading a lot, been reading my scriptures a lot. So I will probably, again, if I come back on Thursday, probably won't cover the stuff I've been covering here. I'll probably do something a little bit more on the scriptural side, historicity of things, to the best of my ability. So just to throw that out there. And with all that, 8 minutes in, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the show. So guys, I have not a lot for you today because I really, the news, there's stuff in the news like, Joe Manchin, he's not going to vote with the Democrats for the federal takeover of election law, which is, by the way, unconstitutional. So that's a big deal, apparently. Supreme Court is not going to hear any cases, or this particular case right now that was up for women being in the draft, because supposedly the legislatures are looking at that. I don't know what they're talking about, because this issue gets brought up over and over again in the legislature every couple of years, and it never goes anywhere. So the court is saying, oh, we're going to be hands off because of this. Well, they're not hands off when they wish to push a left-wing agenda or further the restriction of people's rights. They're not hands off in any way, shape, or form. So it seems to me that perhaps that this is just them being lazy. Not that I want the court to rule from the bench, but yeah. Of course, last week I brought up the inflation thing. There's been some other stupid news with AOC, of course, complaining about her grandmother in Puerto Rico. Why in the world that AOC, who's quite wealthy, will not help her grandmother out, just like Obama talking about his family and his mother and whatever else. I think his grandmother needed health care. It's like, dude, you're a multimillionaire. I don't think AOC is worth that kind of money, but she does give speeches and stuff, guys, which she's getting paid for. And I can tell you, I know what some of these people get paid for. Even somebody who's far more low profile than that, but semi-famous, can easily make $5,000 a speech. So you have other folks who make $80,000, $100,000, $1 million per speech. No joke. So she gains income outside of her federal income and whatever she had from before. But yeah, Matt Walsh decided he was going to, create a GoFundMe, and then she was like, "No, screw you! How dare you conservatives try to help out my family?" So yeah, there was that. There's all kinds of stuff going on, stuff that other people covered over and over again. What I want to cover today is the something new, and that is the rise of communism. And there is a great book called The Naked Communist. It's a rather easy read. It's rather simple. Started by an FBI agent, and 45 points that he read that come from his book and his exploration into communism infiltrating the United States back in the 1950s. 45 points he read on the House floor. And I've talked about this before. If you go back to my BLM video, it's one of the earlier videos I did. In fact, it was probably the first video I had that did really well. Because frankly, my viewership's just not enough to have a lot of videos that do really well. But that one immediately had 500 some odd views, which was amazing. I mean, I'm thankful to have 20, 30, 50 views on anything I do. So we're going to cover some of that, but before that, I'm going to play you a video. And real quick, I see there's some chat coming in, so. But how is it supposed to be kept with Infinity Pool maintained if she sends her money? Yeah. Bleta, or however you pronounce it. I know the word, I've heard it, but I'm just not going to try it, guys. Women in the draft, guaranteed loss. It's time to head down and burn down your White House. Gonna get me yeeted, Holly. Jeez. No, I think we just need to separate. We need to, what will eventually happen, hopefully, ideally, is that the states won't listen to the feds. The feds will try to exert power over them. The states will start to protect its citizens, including up until the point of that they will not allow the feds to operate to arrest people for taxes and stuff like that. Now, this is, again, pretty far-reaching, but potentially in the red states, that is the case. And then, there'll either be war where the feds will try to march military soldiers in or not, which I'm not that worried about because most of the actual, men with, descended testes in this country who were in the military are combat vets, and the rest of them that are in today they're just kids and SJWs. Not to say that there aren't a bunch of patriots in the military, but we know that the standards are very, very hard for people entering today. There's just not enough people who are physically in shape, which is amazing. It blows my mind. So, let's see. Sam says, also, might I recommend passive-aggressive comments that hit at their personal insecurities for taking the White House, I mean. Alrighty, guys. Let me just check all the channels very quickly. Hey, guys, please don't forget to hit that like button. Share, subscribe, the thing. Excuse me, guys. Just had to burp a little bit. Hopefully you didn't hear that through the mic. All right, so here we have from 21 Studios. This is a pretty good video until the end. And then it totally breaks down. This is Richard Granson. By the way, folks, as always, let me know how the volume is or any of those things, or Bill Goes robot voice, which hasn't been an issue for a while. But anything like that, let me know.
Divide the people. Split them into quarreling factions, fighting among themselves rather than their common enemy. For well do they know from long experience that the nation so divided and weakened can be easily conquered from within.
So I want to say right off the bat that I don't think that this is literal communism that's coming in, as it would have been understood in the 60s and earlier. I think it's a simulation of communism, and I'll explain more of what I mean later on. But
so point one here, simulation of communism, literal communism, whatever, I don't care. There's no such thing. It's always a simulation because it can never be literal communism, because literal communism means an anarchist state. And the primary logical issue with having an anarchist state and no property is who's going to maintain that. Because the minute I want to take things from you, I can. Or someone else can. Someone will. No matter what, the communist state will always be a totalitarian state. It is necessary, according to Marx. And again, I always say it's a reversion back to tribalism. So, but let's hear his points out, because he does make a lot of really good points in this.
Not to sound like a mad conspiracy theorist, it would be hard to deny that the kind of divisions that we're seeing being agitated and provoked nowadays fit exactly the model that's being described in this video. How can we divide people? By gender, by ethnicity, by sexuality, by as many things as possible. The one thing that is conspicuously absent, though, is class, which is strange, considering that this is supposed to be a Marxist philosophy. Marx, who would have defined it as quite simply two classes, the oppressed and the oppressor. It was as simple as that. But we do see massive amounts of agitation along these different lines in the culture at large at the moment.
Create the appearance of popular support. The dedicated 1%.
Well, here's the class problem. That got changed with the postmodernists, Foucault, Derrida, the rest of them that are unintelligible. And the class problem became a problem that they had to get rid of because that was the original problem and had to switch it to race. So, again, he's a little confused here, but that is the always the true problem is the class issue. Not that there won't be different classes. Of course, there always will be, because there will be different choices made, and there'll be different opportunities given, and there'll be different levels of ability. So classes are a natural phenomenon of the hierarchy in the individualization of all of human society. That we are unique in our own aspects. We have strengths and faults. Even people who are very talented, very charming, very attractive, very intelligent, very verbally articulate have faults, folks. I can promise you they do. We all have faults.
Percent can trick the 99% into surrendering their birthright.
One of the tactics of narcissistic abusers is to put their target into a sort of a false reality. They take over your perceptions, they take over your emotions, how you feel, and what they like to do is subvert your values. So if you value something, they'll try and invert it and make the opposite value. So you're living inside of a kind of simulated reality, matrix style of the narcissistic abuser. Isn't it strange at the moment how everybody's gone woke? Even banks are woke, supermarkets are woke, big corporations are woke. And I'm sort of sat here thinking, how do you believe that you're the vanguard of an authentic revolution if it's being sponsored by Nike and Coca-Cola? That to me doesn't really make sense. I think what we're seeing right now is part of the phase that you've just heard described to you of it being normalized, that this is hyper-normalization, as a Russian author put it. That which was strange before is just a given now, and we're expected to just de facto accept it as being the way it is. It's considered popular, it's considered widespread, but I wonder if it is really.
This they do by hiding the true communist objectives behind appealing slogans and pretended humanitarian goals.
This one is a little on the nose. I mean, we can see this well-intentioned slogans and logos and easily repeatable phrases that you can put out there. Some of these phrases are almost impossible to deny. You could take as a prime example that's front and center stage in the mainstream media at the moment is Black Lives Matter. Who can deny that? It's like saying water is wet or the sky is blue. So you can't deny it. The name itself has a presupposition built into it that if you denied, you would be a monster. But does this well-intentioned slogan represent anything really, or does it just force you to agree with it? We know that Black Lives Matter is an openly Marxist organization. The people at the top of Black Lives Matter have proudly stated that they are trained Marxists, and they are using this particular psychological tool to get consent and to get people to go along with it as though it were normal. Because who isn't well-intentioned? Who isn't humane? I mean, claiming to be anti-racist or anti-fascist as though that's a virtue, to me seems kind of insane. It's like saying you're anti-murder or anti-genocide. Of course you are. There's no virtue in that. That's just baseline standard humanity. We have a word for people who are not in line with that. We typically call them psychopaths or not.
Now, here's one thing, again, he's missing, but I appreciate what he's saying, is that when people are saying that they're anti-fascist or anti-racist, that's not a statement about them. What it is, it's a statement about you. you who are in the out group, that you are those things. That's what that is. So only if you are within the in group, that is the collective, and not basically completely atomized into what they want you to be, then only then are you anti-fascist or anti-racist. Because if you're outside of their political ideology, you are a fascist and a racist. Now, they don't know what those words mean. They're gobbledygook to them. And we know that the origins, the history of the word racist, or that attack specifically, was used by Lenin, created by Lenin during the Bolshevik revolutions. So they did this very purposefully, and then at the same time, even though those gentlemen were Jewish and whatever else who started that, persecuted Jews, which you never hear about because, well, the left has to pretend like the Nazis have nothing to do with them. Well, they do. Notice how the left today, by the way, goes after Israel really hardcore. Not saying that I'm a Zionist or anything like that, because I'm not. I just want to let everyone else in the world be and concentrate on our own nation, our own communities, our own families, the things here, and not all this international globalist one world government stuff. And one of the things I do want to get to, and I talked to you in the beginning of this as I opened, about wanting to talk about some more scriptural things, is I want to go through the book of Revelations. And I want to demystify it as much as possible. And I want to show you all the various perspectives and show you how you can read it simply and understand it simply as it is written. Because it's not that complicated. People overcomplicate the book. The book is decoded in itself. It's decoded in by referencing specifically other scriptures that it is referencing. And it is written in a certain time period. And there's a certain specific historic perspective of it. Even the Orthodox Church still believes that the beast in the book of Revelations was Rome. Of course it was. Which means that the false prophet had to be the papacy. Now, they don't say that, but that is through the extension of that. It goes through all of those things quite clearly. All of the majority of the reformers believed that the papacy was the false prophet or the harlot in the book of Revelations, because it's the false church that persecutes the saints. But there's a ton of stuff in between there. There's the 7 churches of Asia, which were real churches, but may represent more than that, or spiritual churches. They're the 2 witnesses, which no one seems to be able to figure out, but is plainly explained in the text. It really is. So there's a lot of stuff there and a lot of speculation, and I've read a lot about it over the century, or from various authors over the centuries. In any case, let's keep going with this. I didn't mean to get into a diatribe there.
Narcissists. So it makes special that which should just be a given. And I think it is a given for most people, barring a small minority of extremely mentally ill and emotionally dysregulated people. So it becomes redundant in and of itself. You must agree with the entirely redundant phrase, or else you will fail the purity test of this orthodoxy.
Neutralize the opposition.
We can and must write in a language which sows among the masses hate, revulsion, and scorn toward those who disagree with us.
So this next section refers to something that is beyond cancel culture, and in a way I think is more pernicious and more damaging than cancel culture. Cancel culture refers to a culture of calling people out and then getting them deplatformed, which is pernicious and it does create fear. But I think it's actually the call-out culture that is the problem. And what I mean here is the psychological effect of calling people out. Imagine it's a game and there's 100 of us inside of this system, this game that we're playing, where the way that you gain points is to call out other people. And the way that you lose all your points is to be called out. Now,
It's kind of like Among Us or something. I've never played the game, but I see the memes. No, but he's right in this, 100%. This becomes just a cultural game. I've talked about things like this before, like, of course, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge in the past. It doesn't tend to get people to actually do anything as far as raising money. Now, they did raise money, don't get me wrong. They rose a lot of money. But it was more, I'm a cool kid now. This is why I'm doing it. And I literally knew dozens of people who had no idea how pouring water on themselves was supposed to raise money, not knowing that they didn't have to pour water on themselves. And the idea was that they were supposed to give $100. And if they did pour the bucket, they were still supposed to give $10. So, again, but this is how tribal and simple we are as a species. It really is. We're just like, oh, this looks fun. Everyone else is doing it. Let me do it too. And this is how societies fall apart instantaneously, because no one's actually leading. Everyone is just following.
No, I'm not saying that's what it is. But if we run that as a model, we run that simulation, what will the behavior of the people within that system, within that game be? Surely they would be rushing to find somebody to call out, exerting time, exerting energy, spending calories just to try and find somebody else to call them out. Because if you're the one doing the calling out, the presupposition is you won't be called out yourself. One of the things that I've noticed, particularly amongst young people, particularly in people aged between 15 and 25, largely called Gen Z, you have the tail end of millennials there, but particularly amongst Gen Z, is fear. They're terrified. They're frightened that one day this is going to happen to them. They're walking around with a policeman inside their heads, terrified that if they say or do the wrong thing, they will be called out and there'll be some terrible consequence. And in that way, we learn to police ourselves, isn't
it? And folks, this is psychological terrorism. It really is. Terrorism being a political, a violence being used to achieve a political goal. And I say this as psychological terrorism because that's exactly what this is. And this is very troubling for those young people between those ages he just pointed to, because that is probably when you are the most emotionally vulnerable in your life, the most unsure of yourself, the most awkward with social engagements, because it's when you enter adulthood. And I mean this literally. I don't really like the idea of adolescence, although it does exist. But not the way that we see it here in the West. You hit puberty and all of a sudden your mind and your body changes. You can rationalize far better and you can abstract far better than when you were a child. Not only that, but all of a sudden you want to procreate. It's a very strong drive. Now, it might not be as strong in some people compared to others, but it's definitely a very strong drive during that period of time. It's also awkward and weird. I remember being in middle school and everyone in the locker room and gym would pick on me because I had, pubic hair, because I had underarm hair and all that kind of stuff, and they didn't. Well, I just hit puberty before you all because I just had more testosterone than you all, despite the fact that, I'm a little guy. And that's just the reality of it. But there's all of that. Middle school is probably the worst for kids because at that age, they're just cutting into each other and trying to learn that social thing. And they've learned in the world to be cutthroat because we don't raise them properly anymore. And then you get into high school and maybe it chills out a little bit, but then you start getting, maybe not so much these days, but, back in the last few generations, you start getting teens being sexually active, which creates problems, not because it's bad that teens are sexually active if they're going to pair off early, but because they don't know how to handle the emotional load of sex and sexual relationships. And they're taught by society something completely different. And then they're taught that they have to go to college and all these other things. And they have no idea about their lives or the world. They know absolutely nothing. They've had a piss poor education, piss poor leadership from their parents. And because of that, they're just completely emotional messes until about when they hit 25. And a lot of them still are afterwards. But 25, when that prefrontal cortex solidifies, then you go, oh. And most people will say this and not even realize it. They'll be like, I was a mess up until I turned about 24 or 25. And all of a sudden everything clicked and I got my head straight. And it's like, yes, because science, guys, science, prefrontal cortex is part of our development. That's the same age as well, by the way, folks, that you basically are set within your body, the ossification of your bones. Now, your bones can grow somewhat thicker over time as you age, depending on how much mechanical use they get. But generally speaking, the size of your skeletal structure, your height, all of those things are pretty much set by that point. And then you start to go into the downward slope of aging. But yeah, this is a crucial time of development. And this is, again, why I keep talking about these things that come from the past. They gave us warnings. They told us how it would go. And no one knows this. I mean, people know it. But not a lot of people are spreading the ideas. And there are some folks out there who are going way back, you know, and going, well, we need monarchy. This is the solution to our problem. I'm like, is it though? Because no matter who the king or the ruler is, you're still going to have the same basic problems with your local community and amongst each other. And trust me, the rulers, they just fight and try to murder each other and kill each other. And again, I would go back to King David in the Bible. He was probably one of the best kings that Israel had. And also, both of his sons tried to take over his kingdom. So there you go. Not both of his sons. He had many sons. 2 of his sons, I should say. And then the son that inherited his kingdom, he went mad. So
that convenient. Is there any part of what we're seeing playing out right now that doesn't fulfill a completely totalitarian and corporate agenda? If there is a part of it that I've missed, please tell me in the comments, because all I see this leading to, all I see this being of benefit to, is totalitarianistic agendas.
And thus precipitating mob violence. Master psychologists that they are, the communists know that once the masses are in the streets, it's not too difficult to convert an orderly demonstration into a full-scale riot.
So this is actually a phase. Chaos, unrest, civil unrest, which can easily be provoked into riots. And this was specifically stated by Stalin, by Lenin. They knew that if you could break down the social order, bring in chaos, agitate people along these different lines of division, you would have chaos. And in that chaos, as things seem to be disintegrating, what happens? I mean, if you apply the Hegelian dialectic, you have the thesis, you have the antithesis, and then you have the synthesis. Problem, reaction, solution. What's the problem? Well, the civil unrest. People are rioting. Well, we don't like that. What's our reaction to that? Well, we want it to stop. And then the government can come in and go, we have a pre-made solution for you. It's called stronger laws. It's called curfews. It's called you giving up your civil liberties and becoming more tracked and more trackable in it.
So I often talk about the Hegelian dialectic. I'm going to let him go on with this. But if you guys didn't know, he just showed the little chart there. It is, you have a direction that you want to go. So you create a problem and then you basically create a false dichotomy of opposing sides to get to the solution. And it's just simply a way to direct and manipulate society.
And everything that you do. Why? Well, we have all this civil unrest and authoritarian dictatorship. I don't. All the power goes upward and the state grows. It gets bigger. It gets stronger. And who's demanding for it to get bigger and stronger? The people themselves, who are in turn being enslaved by it. They're basically screaming for their own enslavement. It's a very clever, very sneaky tactic.
And this goes back to, we've been reading the politics of obedience, and that people actually ask and want this. By the way, guys, is my stream in any way bugging out? It doesn't look like it on Entropy or DLive, but I have been getting some cycling on my little playback screen here in YouTube Studio. So, again, if anything messes up, please let me know as soon as possible. I know there is a delay between chat and, me doing this live, so.
In China, as in all countries, the communist appeal was aimed primarily at students, young, idealistic intellectuals, most of whom came from wealthy families who could afford to send them to school. It was from this group that the young communist recruits came who later provided the leadership and backbone for the armed conflict to follow.
And in the next phase, they openly say, we need to target young intellectuals. We need to target students. We need to target young, idealistic people who can be easily deceived into utopian dreams for the future. It's easy to tell young people this stuff because young people, even if they're from wealthy families, they've never owned anything themselves. They're in such a neuroplastic state at their brains and so little experience and so much of idealism. You could say, look at the horror in the world. Look at how awful the world is. Look at the pain. Look at the suffering. We could stop this. Don't you want to stop it? Of course, young students. I was one of them. I was a radical leftist when I was at university. I was a social justice warrior. Why? Because there's terrible things in the world. It's not that the statement of the problem is false. I would agree with 90% of what radical leftists would say is wrong with the world. I would agree with them. I'd say, yes, that is a problem. The way you've identified the problems, largely speaking, it's a little exaggerated and hysterical, but it's actually correct. But the solutions they provide, I agree with none of them. They're always appeals to authority, appeals to force, and it's like a child asking for mummy and daddy to come along by force and fix things. I don't believe anymore that this is the solution. I think individual.
Well, of course it's not, because it's the like communism and all those things that are basically cousins of it are the infantilization of society and the propping up of an individual to be your parent over you. It is nonsensical to be an adult and to want another adult to take care of you. And frankly, it's feeble-minded and I think it's immoral, honestly. I mean, it's one thing to respect authorities and to understand that people do have some sense of importance or authority to you. But even within that, and knowing that they are, according to the Bible, ministers of justice, even within that, it doesn't mean that you should be searching for that, propping it up, and wanting someone to have power and authority over you. The only person I want to have, well, the only person that, in my opinion, that does have true power or authority over me is God. No one else does. I'm a free man. But I then submit myself to become a slave to God and his rule. Because as Paul said, if you are not a slave to Christ, you are a slave to sin and death, or the world. But this is really a fundamental, let's say metaphysical principle here, is that it is the infantilization of society, and it is the wanting and willingness of society to remain infantile. So this isn't progress, folks, as they call it. It is certainly regress, as who is that? Not Dave Rubin. Who is it? Why can't I think of his name? The former Muslim. Any case, whoever coined the regressive movement. Now, I don't use that term very often, although it's a good term to use, but that is what we're looking at. This isn't about growing up. This is about going backward. I always say it's a de-evolution. It's a de-evolution of society. It's a de-evolution of the individual.
Individualism is the solution. Individual rights, individual strength, individual boundaries. This is all a facade. It's a trick. The people who are feeding you these ideas, the people who are feeding the ideas to young students, they don't give a single shit about suffering in the world. All they want is to convince the students that this is the way things are, so that they'll be the frontline infantry, so that they'll be the vanguard, the Revolutionary Guard, to agitate for the riots, to bring around the big social chain, so that it falls right into the hands of government forces, and we end up with...
And this is what Tank and I often talk about over on the Inch Justify the Memes, and what most people correctly analyze is that these people just want the cushy job or the power. We can look at Patrisse Cullors and her excuses why she spent millions of dollars. Or look, just the other day, I didn't look into anything about it, but there was the TikTok girl that was talking about having I guess she had a giant rent or something ridiculous. I don't know. Or bought a $2 million home. I don't know, because I didn't look into it. And before that, she had talked about people being greedy and capitalism and whatever else, from what I understand. You know, it reminds me of an exchange I had on Twitter, which, like, guys, if I get on Twitter, it's like once a week, maybe, for like 10 minutes. And then I see something stupid. And so I'll just kind of, not really troll, but just be like, this is like the most ridiculous take I've ever seen in my life, and you don't understand anything. In any case, I had some girl tell me once that, well, I told her that she said that Christ was a Marxist and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, Christ was an anti-materialist. He said he had no home. He said foxes and birds have dens and nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. He had no home. He was homeless. He had no material. He told his disciples to go out with nothing but the clothes on your back and your staff and a little purse, I think, if I remember correctly. That was it. Don't worry about the things to come. Don't store up money for yourself, because you're just a passerby or passer-througher in the journey of life. You should be living toward God. He told the rich man to give up all of his wealth if he wanted to be perfect and follow him. Now, a lot of people think that that's because the rich man wouldn't give up his wealth, that he was condemned. Or Christ never condemned a man. He said, if you want to be perfect. Before that, he said, you've done all to fulfill the law of the prophets. That is, he honored his mother and father, treated his neighbor, loved his neighbor as himself. So that was it. He said, if you want to be perfect, though, give up your money. And he said it would be hard for people to do such a thing. Be harder than the camel to pass through the eye of a needle. So, again, these ideas fundamentally always revolve around power. They always have. And they're always a degeneration of the society, the individual, the culture. Society as a whole is a lot of things, right? So the culture, the spiritual self, that is the attitude of folks, is the simplest way I can put it in modern English. It demoralizes them. It demoralizes their spirit. And then they just call for more and more power and authoritarianism. Maji Nawaz, thank you, Sam. It was like on the tip of my tongue, brother, but yes, that is exactly who I was talking about.
More authoritarianism and more statism at the end of all of this.
As law enforcement officers sought to restore order, police brutality became the cry of the insurgents. The invariable charges of police brutality were hurled as efforts were made to maintain law and order.
So here you have it, folks, straight from the communist manual itself. Calls for less police power. People screeching about police brutality, cherry-picked incidents where, you have a country that has 330 million people in it, like America, and armed people. You have people with guns and a police force doing its job, making hundreds of thousands of arrests every day. Who knows how many of them become physical, end up in wrestling matches and control and restraint scenarios. And we are fed a narrative by the mainstream media that cherry picks the absolute worst incidents with the worst actors. Because, of course, if you have hundreds of thousands of police officers in operation making hundreds of thousands of arrests, we know from the psychology research at least 1%, possibly 5% of them will be narcissists. And
I don't like this framing. I mean, I don't know anything about Chauvin. Not enough. Now, he had a lot of incidents on his record, but that doesn't mean that. There's a whole slew of things that I could go into there, where it could be the politics of the department. Like, my department was stupid about use of force. We used use of force, but if the situation was something, whatever, they might freak out. It depended on who was in charge that evening sometimes. That's how petty it was. But at the same time, yeah, maybe Chauvin was a little psychopathic. I don't know. We don't know. What we do know is that there's about 2% of the population who have certain traits that tend to make them more lethal. Now, this number goes up significantly when you do not raise children properly. But as far as those who are raised properly, it goes down a lot, but there are certain genetic markers. In fact, there is a scientist who does research on this, and he has all 3 of the genes that they know that are associated with psychopathy. But he's not a psychopath because he was grown and raised in a loving family. But there are also people like me and these might be part of those three genetic factors, who don't have fear, who just don't have a sense of fear like other people do. And it's not like I'm not afraid of anything, or I've never hesitated or paused, but I don't have a lot of fear, folks. It's like you don't do the kind of stuff that I've done in my life and be someone who's timid and fearful. So in certain contexts, that is often referred to as the sheepdog versus the psychopath. The sheepdog is the one who would be a psychopath, but he's got a good moral grounding. The psychopath is just selfish.
Or psychopaths. So of course they're going to do bad things. Of course they're going to exploit their power over people. Of course there will be bad incidents.
It's more likely that psychopaths, by the way, are going to end up being CEOs and things like that than police. But we keep pushing for this defund the police stuff, and they will certainly become the guiding force in the police. Trust me. And there are already a lot there. There definitely are. There are people who get off on their power and authority, folks. These are the leaders generally in our government. Not all of them, but the ones who are most well known.
But if we focus on that and blow it up, we do it again and again and again. The lie is told over and over and over again that all police are like this all the time. We would be left with the impression that, hey, the police is bad and police brutality is the major issue that we should be looking at in the country today. But then when you actually take a cold, cool, objective look at the statistics, you see a completely different picture emerging. If what we want to do is stop violence, let's say, for example, we have an incident where...
I think I'm going to leave that there. I'd like to play a little bit more of this. Now, you guys should go watch this if you can. This is, again, from 21 Studios. He makes some good points here in the beginning, and of course, you won't have me interrupting it if you go to watch it yourself. It's a 20-minute long video, but he goes to a point all the way until all of a sudden he starts talking about, actually, the ideas of communism are great. And he understands they're utopian. But he's saying, I think that those are good ideas. People say this all the time. They're not great. They're bad ideas, folks. Like, having no property is a bad idea. You have to own something. I promise you that. There's no responsibility without ownership. Whether it is owning your actions, what you do, owning yourself as in being a free person, or simply having property rights. We know this because in nations that don't have good laws for property rights, they often build homes and things illegally, more or less, that they can't do anything about. They can't make into businesses or whatever because they don't fit particular regulations. Now, those are basic regulations generally in very poor areas. I can't think. There's a specific lawyer I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I can't think of who he is because it's been so long since I've seen anything from him. But he actually does this, goes down in South America, helps establish like people's rights, property rights in court and whatever else. Without those things, then who dictates who owns what? Do you really think that each according to his need is a real thing? Like people are just going to be like, oh, yeah, I only need this much today. I only need so much. No one does that. No one's like, oh, man, I don't know, think of one of your favorite things, like shrimp or crab or seafood. No one goes to an all-you-can-eat, and goes, I'm not going to get my money's worth out of it. Of course you are. You go down, I don't know what they would charge right now, the way things have been, but or if they're even existent. But if you go down to like a place like Fogo de Chão, which sounds very fancy, it's just a Brazilian barbecue place. And there used to be one in Baltimore. I don't know if there is anymore. But you pay like $50-$60 a plate, and then it's like all you can eat meat. And then they have a buffet you can eat there or whatever as well. But all the sides are meant to keep you from eating all the meat. You're going to tell me that if I just brought people into there and said, have at it, guys, to each according to their needs, that they wouldn't be wiped out in minutes, that people wouldn't try and hoard or steal extras? Of course they would. This is the tragedy of the commons. It's really how all this works in the end. So I'll take a break here in a little bit. Well, actually, you know what? Let's do that now, and then I want to get into the Naked Communist, since we're almost at the bottom of the hour. So I think you guys are going to enjoy this. If you haven't heard of this book, it's pretty simple. I'm going to go through the preface today, maybe some other things. I don't have a lot to get done this evening, and since I won't be in for, I don't know, portions of the week, perhaps I'll go to 5:30 or so today, or maybe even 6. I doubt I'll string that late, but if you all will stay with me, I will do all those things. But let's do some Jesus of Testimony. Let me run through chat real quick. Oh, I got 2 viewers on Entropy now. Guys, if you need a reminder, you can go to Entropy if you wish to donate. Not saying anyone does, just saying. I know times are lean, folks. Times are very lean for a lot of folks. But you can do that. You can also go over to DLive and use their little crypto system. And, of course, there is a Subscribe-Star. The link is in the description on the YouTubes and on the DLive. I don't know that Entropy has any features like that yet, so nothing there. But you can do that way. But the best thing you can do is like, share, subscribe, share this out, help people come in. I really am trying to build a thing here where we are talking, having intellectual conversations, realizing the fault and flaws in our perceptions, where we can see the reality of the world and understand the history in which we come from, the root. Because if we don't have that, then there is no hope for our future, in my opinion. So, let's see. You guys were kind of chatting amongst yourselves there for a little bit, talking about bake sales in front of the White House and all. Sam says, I can see the headlines now. Dangerous right-wingers bring chemicals to fire and fire to aggressively confront politicians. What can I read today? Man. Birthday cakes are problematic. Yeah, you guys just chatting amongst yourselves. As the black square on Insta and the rainbow washing of everything right now. Yeah. Well, Holly, when we do the show on Wednesday night, we'll definitely be talking about Pride Month. Because the memes are off the hook. Sam says, Bill, sex is just an act. It doesn't have any other consequences, anything more to it. Yeah. Yeah, you get highly emotionally unstable teens doing that, and bad times come. And I know, I was a highly emotional teen having sex and bad times came. You know, you think you love your girlfriend, and I'm not saying I didn't, but it was a immature love, right? All right. To each according to his need, not a single person needs ice cream. Not a single person needs video games. Not a single person needs leisure. They can survive without it. Good point. Very good point. Yeah. Not much of a life, though. This was interesting because I was watching, I don't know if you guys know Adam Ragazia, but he's a YouTuber, does food stuff, and I think he used to do radio. I don't know. In any case, he's kind of lefty, obviously, from things he says, but he was talking about palm kernel oil. And then I watched this earlier today. I seen it kept popping up. Now, he got a little political into the disparities and colonialism and all this other stuff. And it's like, boo-hoo. It happened. This is where the world's at now. Let's get over that, right? Like, how far are we going to go back? How far are we going to go back to generational sins? Besides, I don't think colonialism was necessarily a generational sin. I think it actually helped advance most of the world, but, hot take there. Not that I believe in imperialism or anything of that sort either. I'm just saying that those nations would still be far behind otherwise. But they start getting into the how these people work and their standards of work and all this other stuff. And it's like, or in the environmental impact of it, I'm thinking, okay, this is just such absurd first world rich people problems. Those folks are trying to survive in a world that is not even anywhere near yours. They're trying to survive in a world that has modern technology, but still operates like the world operated 250 years ago. And even 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the world was not as luxurious as it is today in the wealthy nations of the West. It just wasn't, folks. And everyone all throughout history had it really, really rough. So I'm kind of sick and tired of rich folks here in the United States talking about poor folks in other nations and how they don't have the same standards as the United States. You have a standard like kings have never had before in history. Even if you live in a little tiny home. You know, it's like 90 degrees outside today. Sun is a-blazing. It's hot here. I'm in like a 68 degree weather controlled house. What my thermometer's over there on the other side of the room. I'm about to say, guarantee it's about 68 degrees in my house right now. Not because I even want to keep it that cool, but because my wife is pregnant and been getting hot flashes. I can go to the refrigerator and get food. I have my refrigerator stocked. And even then, if I don't want that, you know what I can do? I can go drive a mile down the street and go get fast food. I can go drive another half a mile and go to the grocery store. Go drive 5 minutes and go into town, or 10 minutes, whatever it is for me, and go to any number of grocery stores there. Hyper, super convenience. And to sit there and look at other nations and be like, oh, they're trying to build up their societies and they're doing this and this is one of their main industries, and go, the poor working conditions of these people. It is the most snotty, snobby, elitist thing ever, and it drives me nuts. And it drives me nuts when Americans do it to other Americans here. It's sad, really. Let's see here. Holly says, I'm in here till you're done driving now, and I'll be intermittent chat. Yeah, okay. Saying there's certainly times of the month I do, in fact, need ice cream. Okay, then only for the women. Extra license if pregnant. Yeah, my wife has been crushing ice cream every night. I don't know how. I mean, the baby's big, but she's still really thin. I don't know how she eats the way she does. I think Holly having ice cream would probably be good for the community as well. All right. Well, we'll keep ice cream in the dystopian socialist future. You guys heard it here first, right here on All Minus One. Ice cream will be in the dystopian future for all to enjoy. All right, guys. So we are in Jesus of Testimony. I'm going to play the part 2 of this, which is going to talk about the validity of the Gospels. Play about 10 minutes or so of this, as I usually do. Going to get up, walk around, and get some water and stuff like that. Hey, Dollhawk, no worries, man. Come back. Just rewatch that first hour. Wasn't that important. Never is. Always saying the same things, but sometimes I say stuff that's new. So, in any case, bud, appreciate you showing up. All right, guys. I think once again, as always, let me know if there's any volume issues or anything like that.
The primary historical sources we have for the life of Jesus are the Gospels and the letters which are now contained in the New Testament of the Bible. But are the New Testament writings accurate sources for the events they report? What are the conclusions of scholars and historians who examine the reliability of the Gospels with the same criteria by which all other historical documents are examined?
You know, one thing that kills me is the way we play kind of fast and loose with the New Testament, but we don't treat the rest of history that way. For example, Alexander the Great has got to be one of the best-known personages from the ancient world. The stories we have of Alexander, the accounts of Alexander, go from 300 to 450 years after his death. 300 to 450. And the two best known stories, biographies of Alexander are Plutarch and Arrian, and they're both at the end of that range, 425, 450. But we know so much about Alexander, and he went across from Macedonia east and to India, and he did this and he did that, and he conquered this, and his phalanx configuration of troops, and nobody could stand against him. We're so sure we know all this data, and the sources are 300 to 450 years later. Almost totally. But the Gospels, using critics' dates now, I'm going to use critics' dates to show that they still doesn't change anything. On the critics' dates, Mark is only about plus 40 after Jesus. Matthew is about plus 50 on the critics' dates. Luke about plus 55, and everybody puts John at about plus 65. Well, how bad is 65? 65 years later. Way, way better than anything we have for Alexander.
Scholars point out that the writers of the New Testament did not intend for their works to be considered fictional or legendary. Arguably, the Gospels of Jesus Christ can be categorized in the genres of ancient biography and historical monograph.
The Gospels were ancient biographies. The majority of scholars now recognize that and are surely right. I mean, when you look at the options in ancient literature, the kinds of genres, the kinds of writings that were available in ancient literature, somebody approaching the Gospels, it's the story about a person who lived recently. They didn't write novels about people who lived recently. In fact, usually novels were romance novels about fictitious characters. Not always, but usually. You look at all the options, and the Gospels fit biography in all the important respects that people would look for biography. Of the four Gospel writers, one of them, Luke, was also a historian. A biography that's part of a larger work, a multi-volume work that deals with other historical characters, would usually be seen as just a biographical volume within a multi-volume history. Well, the second volume of Luke's work, the Book of Acts, talks about the history of the early Christian mission, especially how they went from being centered especially in Jerusalem to going out and reaching the Gentiles. And the texture of the Book of Acts actually changes as it's moving from one setting to another, from the Jerusalem church, the piety of the Jerusalem believers worshiping in the temple, to a movement that begins spreading among the Gentiles. And the way Luke chronicles it is very fitting for what most scholars consider, not all scholars again, but most scholars consider to be a historical monograph. It's interesting when you look at many of the details of Luke's second volume, the Book of Acts, especially when it gets into the diaspora outside of Judea and Galilee, and it gets into the larger Roman world. There are so many areas where we can test him. We can test what he says against Paul's eyewitness accounts of the same things, like Paul being let down in a basket from the walls in Damascus, to the mention of particular authorities in particular cities. The chief leader in Ephesus is called the town clerk, the grammatus, which is correct for Ephesus. The leaders of Thessalonica are called politarchs, which was correct for Thessalonica. Novels didn't work at getting so many details correct. For example, when Paul is tried before Felix, the governor Felix, well, the time that Paul was there was the time that Felix was the governor. You know, somebody making these things up wouldn't have known that. Novels, again, didn't normally include that kind of information. Moreover, Felix actually had 3 wives, not all at once, but he was married to 3 princesses in succession. And the one he was married to at this time was Drusilla, who is mentioned as his wife in the Book of Acts. I mean, even if Luke were checking things out, he could have gotten the wrong wife. Paul then appears before Festus, who is, in fact, the next Roman governor. And Festus invites Agrippa II and Bernice to come hear Paul. Well, Agrippa was the ruler of an area at that time. He was known for visiting new officials coming into the area. And his sister Bernice, actually, she had been married. She had not lived with him for a long time, but just recently the marriage had broken up, and Bernice had come to stay with her brother Agrippa. So, I mean, getting the right details at the right time. Moreover, Luke tells us up front at the beginning of his gospel that he's not just making these things up. He gives a good preface for historical work.
It seems pretty clear that what we've got in the Gospels and in Acts is an attempt at serious ancient biographical and history writing. Insofar as we can check them internally and compare them one to another and find little bits of information in Paul's letters or in Acts or in the rest of the New Testament or in some secondary sources, so far as we can check them, they seem to be accurate. They seem to be reliable witnesses.
One of the internal evidence tests for historical reliability is the use of primary sources.
A lot of history relies on testimony. And testimony is really, it's a form of human knowledge, alongside various other forms, but it's the form of human knowledge when you know something because someone else has told it to you. And it's not something you can verify for yourself, otherwise you wouldn't need to be told it. It's basically something that you rely on someone else to know. And we do this all the time in everyday life. An enormous amount of our life is based on believing what other people say in one way or another. And we don't have to be credulous about this. We don't have to believe everything everyone says. You know, we have reasons for trusting some people, not trusting other people. We have reasons for trusting some things that people say and not others. We can be critical about this. We're not stupid. But nevertheless, we rely a great deal of the time on things that we cannot verify for ourselves that other people say. One thing about the Gospels, of course, is that the events they are relating are events that the people who reported them regarded as supremely significant events. They're events that had changed their lives, affected everything about their own lives, and they certainly thought of them as kind of world-changing events, enormously important, unique kind of events, events in which God was involved in a special way. If there's something special about the events, if they're, as it were, out of the ordinary events, a lot of things that happen in history, we can think, oh, well, yes, of course, that's the sort of thing that happened to me yesterday, or that's the sort of thing I read about in the newspaper. But sometimes in history you come across, as it were, virtually unparalleled events, the sort of thing you haven't got immediate experience of yourself. So how do you deal with those? I think another really good example of this, it's a very different sort of event, but another example of a kind of unique sort of event in modern history is the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. This, I think, is again an event where people who write about the Holocaust are tremendously dependent on the testimony of Holocaust survivors. And if we didn't have that testimony of Holocaust survivors, if we just had sort of the external facts that you could get from the German records and so forth, we would have no idea what it was really like. You know, you absolutely need the insider testimony, people who went through it and experienced it. That's what you need for a unique sort of event. And that's why I think the fact that the Gospels come to us from people who were insiders, who were with Jesus, who were close to Jesus, who experienced these things themselves, actually makes them much more valuable as testimony to what was really going on.
The Apostle Peter wrote, "For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." In John's Gospel we read, "And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may believe."
2, if not 3, of the 4 gospel writers were actually present at some of the things that they record. And
I'm going to leave it there. I'll tell you, Stephen Gregg's, if you're into the faith, is an interesting teacher, and I really like his work. But that was about 10 minutes, so we'll start here at about the 30-minute mark. we'll start here tomorrow. And I'm going to get this other stuff pulled up real quick. I'm just checking my CPU, guys, because I had some... it was running kind of hard earlier. I'm not quite sure why, but it was. And we are going to read from The Naked Communist. We'll read the preface. And once again, anyone who has jumped in, I just want to remind, especially if you're not a regular here, that there is a DLive. There are links there on the DLive page. There is an entropy. You can donate both places there. I'm not monetized on YouTube. I probably never will be because, well, why would I? They take a large cut. They also then get to manipulate and control you a lot more. And I don't really think that I'm going to be on YouTube forever. Who knows? I'll be on it as long as they'll let me. But we don't know the way big tech is going. I mean, seems to be going towards the CCP, but who knows? Who knows? All the stuff, the videos that I've made in the past, the few of them, not a lot, most of my videos have been fine, but they have been taken down because of, COOF misinformation that's now being touted as being true information. Yeah, stuff like that. So, again, if you guys want to, you can go over there and do that, but most importantly, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Like, share, that stuff. That helps me grow. That helps the channel more than anything in the end because I get to educate more folks, and that's really what's important. And then on top of that, it helps give me some clout to help get guests on. So, well, hello, Heather Hill. See, that's a new name. And that's exactly what I'm asking for. New people come in and to subscribe. Although you might be someone that popped in a few weeks back, and I'm just not used to seeing you all the time. So it's always hard to say. I know my regulars. You guys know who you are. And many of us are in the chat on other channels as well, of course. So let's get into this. This is the preface of The Naked Communist. So I'm going to do this through Kindle. I bought a Kindle edition of this just so I could do it easily here instead of trying to find a PDF or any number of other things. We probably won't read through the whole book, but I'll read through certain sections of it. Okay, first time here, Heather. Well, I appreciate you coming. If you aren't aware, what I do on this channel is basically I just talk about the problems of the world, our past or history. I'm a classical liberal as far as politics go, and try to analyze the world today and where classical liberal ideas warned about the politics of the world today and how it would go awry. And then I also interject things like my faith and Christians' beliefs in here as well, based on, as best as possible, my first century understanding of the metaphysics of that time, first, second, third century, because I primarily source from the ante-Nicene fathers. So welcome to the channel. Thank you for showing up. In any case, The Naked Communist first appeared as a privately published book in 1958. At the height of the anti-communist movement in America, W. Cleon Skousen had studied communism and its ruthless expansion around the world for several decades. Confusion over the movement's ultimate goal and the philosophies and theories that drove it into popularity spurred Skousen to write this. Write this book. It was an instant hit and became a national bestseller, with copies appearing on the shelves of more than 1 million homes across America. Today, after the spread of communism has slaughtered an estimated 150 million people. Now, this was written in the originally in the 1950s. Now, some people say only 100 million people. I tend to like the 200 million people number because I think it's probably more realistic, actually. But the conservative number is about 100 million. So, again, we can dispute over numbers. Either way, a lot of people died because of the ideas of communism. And they didn't die because, unlike what the communists today will say about capitalism allowing people to die because they starve to death. I don't know how that or when that happens. In fact, we don't even track the numbers. Not to mention that, community support, churches, charities are all over the place propping up people who are in bad positions. They really are. You just got to go seek the help. But in any case, communism did this directly. They directly, by their centralized control policies, starved out people. They directly murdered people, and they directly exiled people, which actually exile is the least worst of those things. In fact, it's actually a rather good thing, generally, because at least you're sparing the individual's life. Although in ancient times, it would have been a death sentence. And in many cases, not in all cases, of course. So, continuing. And now threatens to reignite its consuming global reach. The naked communist is as relevant as it was 55 years ago. In July 2014, the noted surgeon and political commentator Dr. Ben Carlson appeared on Fox News and said, "The naked communist lays out the whole progressive agenda. You would think by reading it that it was written last year. It shows what the progressives are trying to do to the American family and what they are trying to do to destroy the Judeo-Christian values and morality." President Ronald Reagan has worked with Skousen since the 1950s and 1960s to combat the spread of communism's destructive ideas and said no one is better qualified to discuss the threat to the nation from communism. You will be alarmed, you will be informed, and you will be glad you heard W. Cleon Skousen. In 1961, Skousen added to his book the 45 communist goals that lay out the steps aimed at ruining the culture of America. The purpose was to abolish the Constitution and turn the United States into the fold of Marxist theoretical one world government. As of 2014, all but one of those 45 goals has been reached. And again, I covered this very early on when I started this channel last year when I made a video on Black Lives Matter and what they really were about. It's at the end. It's kind of buried at the end of the video, but I'm showing you the goals. I talked about it. It is there. You can go find it yourself. This was actually read on the congressional floor back in the 1950s. So it is in the Library of Congress. Today, it is more important than ever to understand these communist ideas and to know how they have eroded freedom around the world. With that understanding, readers will be prepared to take action. They will know what steps are needed to rescue liberty in this, the last nation still standing in opposition to the failure formula that has wrecked hundreds of millions of lives over the past century. I don't know if we're the last nation standing up to it, but we're the last real power, and we're not really standing up to it now, are we? So here's just like the founder of communism. Here's the contents. Let's just go down to introduction, the rise of the Marxist man. Heather said, "Oh, good, I passed gun laws here in Texas." Well, we like our firearms. I have some in reach. So I'm a West Virginian, Marylander originally. So once again, though, Heather, we appreciate you being here. And everybody in the chat, be nice. Not that everyone's going to be mean, because I don't really have any real jerks in my chat that I'm aware of. Homo Marxian, the Marxist man, that is. It is a terrible and awesome thing when a man sets out to create all other men in his own image. This goes back again to what I say often. These folks think that they are literally themselves God. They're pretty egotistical. Such became the goal and all-consuming ambition of Karl Marx. Not that he would have made each man equal to himself. In fact, it was quite the contrary. The image he hoped to construct was a great human colossus with Karl Marx as the brain and builder and all other men serving him as the eyes and ears, feet and hands, mouths and gullet. In other words, Marx surveyed the world and dreamed of the day when the whole world of humanity could be forced into a gigantic social image which conformed completely to Marx's dream of a perfect society. Now, we just, over the weeks, have read Bastiat's The Law. And Heather, I suggest you go back and go watch some other of my older content, the stuff I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. If you're interested, if you're not aware of Bastiat's The Law, it's a great read. It is pretty much a summation of my political philosophies. But we see that he correctly, Bastiat, in the 1840s, identified this same thing. I think it was in the 1840s, might have been in the 1880s. I get that confused with de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville's, I think, House or parliamentary floor debate, their legislative branch in France at the time, the Republic, was they were debating against socialism. I think that was in 1848, and maybe Bastiat was 1860s. It doesn't matter. Nonetheless, it's over 100 years old, and it predicts exactly what would happen. So, back to the text. It says, to achieve this goal, Marx requires two things. First, the total annihilation of all opposition, the downfall of all existing governments, all economies, and all societies. Then he wrote, I shall stride through the wreckage, a creator. The second thing he needed was a new kind of human being. The Übermensch, right? Nietzsche's Überman. He visualized a regimented breed of Pavlovian men whose minds could be triggered into immediate action by signals from their masters. This is also what the fascists wrote about, because they're from the same ilk. Their ideologies came from the same place, and the same people. The fascists just expounded it more in a slightly different direction. He wanted a race of men who would no longer depend upon free will, ethics, morals, or conscience for guidance. Perhaps without quite realizing it, Marx was setting out to create a race of human beings conditioned to think like criminals. Yep, pretty much. It is it's definitely a generation of greedy, disenchanted, atomized individuals who are pushing this, and they have no standards other than the standards of standardlessness, right? It's all about rhetoric. It's not about reality. It's not about action. It's not about your alignment between your words and your actions, that is. It is simply about the propaganda and the goal and propping themselves up. Producing such a race had been the dream of power-hungry men for more than 4,000 years. Nimrod had projected the design. Plato polished it. Saint Simeon sublimated it. Now Marx materialized it. And this, again, I tell you about all the time. We will eventually go through parts of, not all of, but parts of the 40 centuries of wage and price control, which will talk about centralized planning and central control of government for the last 4,000 years of human history. We know that Plato taught about a republic through the eyes of Socrates. Now, I think that this was Plato's dream, not Socrates, but he states it as if it were Socrates' ideal of how to construct a society, and it's exactly the same type of Marxian society that we see to be constructed today. And then on the Christian principle, and this is, again, a lot going back to recent conversations I've had with Orthodox Christians, not to say that they're not in the faith or anything like that, but their beliefs in monarchy versus that God should be our king, or Christ is our king. And Nimrod's the first example of that, and he was the king of Babylon according to tradition, to ancient tradition, and the Tower of Babel, where God separated and confused the people's language. So I don't believe in monarchy. I believe in having a society of sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but anyways, I believe in having a society of strong, educated, moral people who are generally free, and then maybe having, some councils or whatever to take care of disputes, because disputes will always happen, and you have to have wise men, hopefully, to be able to adjudicate that. The problem always becomes a problem of scaling, and we are way too overscale with not enough representation, too much bureaucracy, and too much unaccountability. So I would say let's go back to Dunbar's number, and maybe we can scale that up times 10. Maybe. And after that, then we need to start, again, breaking off, and we can have treaties and alliances outside of that, whatever. But that is with the other governments. But again, that's the whole thing I'm not going to get into, but these are just musings, thoughts that I have about how we can recreate, reorganize ourselves into a more productive society. Today, this breed of criminally conditioned man walks the earth in sufficient numbers to conquer countries or continents, to change laws and boundaries, to decree war on or peace. He might well be called the Homo Marxian, the Marxist man. He has made it terribly clear that he intends to become the man of the 20th century. And he was the man of the 20th century. All over the world this happened. Even though movements happened here in the U.S., it did not pick up full steam until recently. But that's because the entrenchment within academia was not complete until the postmodernists like Foucault came over, or Derrida, to the U.S. to teach in our systems here in the 1960s. And with that as well, other things were brought in, like John Money and his school, his thought of transgenderism, which completely failed, but we're repropping that up. And then, of course, the internet. We saw the Marxism prop up a little bit in the early 90s, but people were still too liberty-minded. It went away. We just called it political correctness then. And now, in the last decade, it's sprung its ugly head again and is infested within our federal government. And it really is. But that has been something in place for over 100 years, of course. Homo Marxian is frightening and puzzling to the rest of humanity because a criminally conditioned man does not respond the way normal people expect. That's true. I know. I worked in a jail for 13 years, I can tell you. For example, if a well-meaning person invited a professional criminal into his home for dinner, the shifty-eyed guest would be likely to survey the fine variety of choice foods and expensive silverware and shiny goblets. Sorry, guys, that jumped 2 pages on me, so kind of messed me up there. And completely miss the warm sincerity and friendship which the host was trying to convey. In fact, the criminal mind would probably conclude that his host was not only soft-hearted, but soft-headed, usually. I mean, I've had criminals in my family, like literally, steal things. So, and that's family, guys. Not that families are perfect in any way, shape, or form, but people tend to, you would think, do better to their kin. That's not always true, of course, but you would think. It says eventually he would get around to deciding that such a weak man could not possibly deserve so many fine things. He would spend the rest of the evening figuring out how he could return in the darkness, the night, and relieve his host of all his bounteous treasures. Anyone familiar with the history of communist leadership during the past 100 years will immediately recognize the same kind of mind at work. The flagrant abuse of the U.S. friendship and generosity during World War II is typical. And again, if we get to those 45 points, maybe I'll just bring them up here at some point. We can peruse through them very quickly. You'll see how much of this actually has been implemented. And by the way, folks, the 10 points of the Communist Manifesto, the 10 planks that is, they are all actively working in the United States and have been for decades. Homo Marxian puzzles all those who try to work with him because he seems irrational and therefore unpredictable. In reality, however, the Marxist man has reduced his thinking to the lowest common denominator of values. Taken from nature in the raw, he lives exclusively by the jungle law of selfish survival. Each according to his needs, folks. We just talked about this. In terms of these values, he is rational almost to the point of mathematical precision. Through calm or crisis, his responses are consistently elemental and therefore highly predictable. because Homo Marxian considers himself to be made entirely of the dust of the earth, he pretends to no other role. He denies himself the possibility of a soul and repudiates his capacity for immorality. Right. If you have no soul, you cannot be immoral, folks. If God doesn't exist, then all things are relative. Now, this in part is goes back to, say, the work of Jung and Piaget and Jordan Peterson, in that they were trying to find this hierarchy in nature. Now, I think that the hierarchy in nature that they point to, now, don't get me wrong, Jung was a Christian, guys, of some sort, at least. But what they're pointing to is I think in Jung's belief was showing, hey, this is this symbolism, this collective unconscious proves that God exists. In Piaget's mind, he was a religious man as well, that this hierarchy proves that God exists. Now, Peterson hasn't made that decision yet, but hopefully he will come to Christ soon, especially given that his wife has converted, apparently. So we'll see. We'll see. I think that he would do a lot better if that were the case, but I do not deny the man's importance as a secular figure either. So it says, he denies himself the possibility of a soul and repudiates his capacity for immorality. He believes he has had no creator or has no purpose or reason for existing except as an incidental accumulation of accidental forces in nature. And this goes back to Seraphim Rose's book on nihilism, which we will get back to. I kind of am debating if I want to do that as like a live story time segment or not, since I started it that way. It's probably what I will do. But so this book, if you guys aren't aware, if you don't recall, I was reading this through this for a while, and this points to most of the problems with the West. The one issue I have with him being an Orthodox is he props up monarchy. And again, I watched the thing with Jay Dyer and Michael Sisko a few weeks back, last week after I met with Michael, because he's running for Congress in my area. And Jay Dyer was pointing, well, it's the wrong theology in the West that led to all these problems, is it? Well, what happened in the East where the Orthodox Church ruled with the right theology, where everyone basically adopted communism? What happened there? So I challenge that mindset. Maybe eventually I'll get Jay on the other show, The Ends Justify the Memes. So, by the way, Heather, if you're still hanging out, I do have another channel called The Ends Justify the Memes, which is a live show with a co-host and producer every Wednesday at 7 p.m. It's more of a laid-back, fun show. So we do meme reviews, real fake news, that is. But anyone else out there listening who may not know, go over to that other channel. We're almost at 300 subs, so I'd like to get that there soon. It'd be amazing. All right. Being without morals, he approaches all problems in a direct, uncomplicated manner. Self-preservation is given as the sole justification for his own behavior, and selfish motives, or stupidity, are his only explanations for the behavior of others. Does that sound about right to you? Every Marxist you meet, it's always, now today it's racism, of course. Of course it's racism! But it's all projection, right? They have the problem with the different ethnic groups and want to award different ethnic groups different things based on arbitrary standards, more or less. The arbitrary standard of being, well, you were born this color, despite your wealth, despite whatever, despite your station in life. But then the selfish motives too. You're a selfish, horrible person for wanting people to live in a free society, to be able to be masters of their own lives, and to be able to voluntarily help and trade with other people. You're selfish for that. They are unselfish for wanting to take all those things away from you, enslaving you, making sure you can't own any property, and any work that you do or labor that you do, they get to take and redistribute. I think that they don't understand what these words mean, right? What's the Inigo Montoya thing? You keep saying that word. I don't think you know what it means, or whatever he says. Yeah, I haven't seen The Princess Bride in a while. Selfish motives or stupidity are his only explanation for the behavior of others. With Homo Marxian, the signing of 53 treaties and a subsequent violation of 51 of them is not hypocrisy, but strategy. The subordination of other men's minds to the obscuring of truth is not deceit, but a necessary governmental tool. Absolutely. This was something that when Tank and I first started doing the Ends Just for the Memes, he straightened out my mind really quickly. And only because, Tank, if you guys aren't aware, studied Chinese history and the Chinese history, recent history of the rise of Marxism in China. So he studied this in college, and he reads a lot of interesting stuff that I don't really get into. But he explained to me in the most simplest terms. It was something I already knew, but it articulated it very well. And that the left sees humanity not as cycles, as most people on the right, or whatever distinctions, the liberty-minded versus the central controllers, whatever distinctions we want to make, because left-right's more about those who wish to rebel, the revolutionaries versus the people trying to maintain the line, right? But, and anyone who doesn't understand that gets that confused. It's not about conservatism as far as the way we see it today, or liberalism versus conservatism, or leftism versus, rightism as being those things. It's just revolutionaries versus the established government. That is what the left-right dichotomy is. I lost my train of thought there, guys. Let me get back to it here. The progression of progressive ideologies throughout history. They see it as somewhere that humanity is going to get to eventually, and that they are nothingness within that system. It's very much like Mussolini wrote in the Doctrines of Fascism, that man outside of history is a non-entity. It's like, what? Man doesn't exist outside of government? What? That's what he said, and that's the way leftists think. That's the way progressives think. That's the way these people who are central controllers think. That it doesn't matter who you are, because you're expendable if you're holding the progress of humanity back, basically human evolution back to their mind. This is where, again, we can get into Klaus Schwab, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the chipping of everybody. And I mean, literally, he talks about this, guys. It's not like it's not there in his Fourth Industrial Revolution. It is there. Perhaps I'll bring it up in the future. The Neuralink. They want everyone to be connected through Neuralink. Do you not see a problem with that? It makes for great fiction, though. It's going to really, it's going to be a good central part of my my book coming out here at the end of the year. So, in any case, so yeah, because it is this ultimate goal, and they see themselves as God, and they need to make humanity progress to this perfection, this perfect utopia in godhood. Basically, they're taking the first lie of the garden, right? Because they're taking that in that mindset, they don't care who gets trampled along the way. They don't care if they destroy their own. And it's all very hubristic in that they have the right mindset and power and morals, and you don't, and therefore you must die. In the end, it's always might makes right. So, anyways, Marxist man has convinced himself that nothing is evil, which answers the call of expediency. He has released himself from all the confining restraints of honor and ethics, which mankind has previously tried to use as a basis for harmonious human relationships. Now, I've talked about Marx's writings, his poetry before, and his demonic poetry, and how he says he wants to destroy and tear down God. And I know some of you aren't religious at all. As Holly would say, I know she's told me last week, she's not religious, but she lives as so. And that's good. At least you do that. But to have a actual hate toward the idea of the creator is kind of gross and sick to me. That takes a very twisted person. And Marx was a twisted person as well, if you know anything about him and his illegitimate son and how he treated him. I just don't think he had anything good to say, folks. In fact, he got everything backwards. and could put out nothing more than the manifesto. Das Kapital was Engels, folks. Marx might have worked on it and tried to write it over years, but 15 years and nothing happened. Nothing happened. So, yet he's some sort of genius. No, he's not. He's not at all. History has demonstrated that because of his mental conditioning, Homo Marxian is probably the most insecure of all men in his feelings. Well, that seems right with the SJWs, does it not? Since he believes himself to be an accidental phenomenon in a purposeless universe, he has an unsustainable appetite to bring all things under his total domination. He admits that until this is done, he cannot feel secure. Right, and this is always the thing with people that are power hungry, who want control of things. They're insecure people. When, like, I have no control ultimately over my life. I leave it in the hands of God. That doesn't mean I don't try to make decisions and direct my life. But, folks, I don't know if someone's going to come to my house today and try to murder my whole family. I just don't. I have no control over that. I don't know if I go down the street, if I'm going to get hit by a car, or if a deer is going to run into me, if something tragic will happen. I don't know. I don't know that when I go to bed tonight that I'm going to wake up in the morning. Maybe I have an aneurysm in the middle of the night. I don't know these things. I don't pretend to know them, and I don't care, because I try, for the most part, to live in the day, in the now. And that doesn't mean that I can't, look toward the future and try to build some things and help out the rest of humanity either. I'm just saying that I don't know. And therefore, I don't try to control it. I go with the flow. Not only must he conquer the human race, but he has assigned himself the task of conquering matter, conquering space, and conquering all forces of cosmic reality so as to bring order out of natural chaos. Yes. And this is much like Mao talking. There are quotes from Mao talking about how they could dictate and direct the nature of the world itself. And this is what these people think. It's what they're trying to do. It's why they tell you not to, well, I think it's multifaceted, but they tell you not to eat meat and stuff like that. And environmentalism and all this other stuff. And it's like they're actually slowly killing you by everything that they tell you what to do. They actually are. The stuff, it blows my mind, the stuff that they say is true, that people know instinctively isn't true, and that we've known for thousands of years isn't true, yet suddenly we know it to be true. And the reality is, folks, is the best science, the highest efficacy, generally tells us that our assumptions from our ancestors are true. They just didn't understand them in a perfectly scientific manner as we do today. They understood them more in a metaphoric manner often, or they didn't quite have the processes fully right. I know there'll be some big brain out there go, well, Bill, but, back in the day, they thought that certain things were, certain crazy things happen, like let me think, like the pneuma, the spirit, was breath, and how it animated your system through air, and that, I mean, yeah, sure. Okay. But they were getting it somewhat right. They got some aspect of it. We really shouldn't poo-poo on the ancients, given that their technology was way less than ours. A lot of them were way more intelligent than we are today. You think that they just figured out mathematics and calculus all by themselves? By the way, calculus was discovered long before Newton. Newton developed calculus, of course, on his own. A Christian man, by the way, dedicated his life to God afterwards, wrote a whole treatise on the book of Revelations. But, not Galileo, who in the world? Archimedes, back in the day. We found in a monastery some years back, we found an actual copy of one of his diaries. And it had been bleached and printed over, but behind it was a form of calculus he developed 2,000 years ago. The ancients were very intelligent. They were no different than us. They just did not have all the current amenities. He must do this, he says, because man is the only creature in existence which has the accidental but highly formative capacity capacity to do intelligent, creative thinking. He believes that since Homo Marxian is the most advanced type of man, he must accept the responsibilities of a supreme being. That is, the individual who's in charge must act like the supreme being. Ever wonder why the communists in China call their leader the supreme leader? Ever wonder why that kings of old, in China specifically and Japan, were god kings? But in ancient Rome as well, Caesar was king in almost all societies. Xerxes, Darius, all of those folks. The story in the book of Daniel is the story of Nebuchadnezzar in the beginning. That is the Babylonian king, and how he was a god king. That is part of the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Sam says something about modern knowledge standing on the shoulders of giants. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have no humility today. And the reason why I think we don't have humility is because we don't have any true grounded spirituality. We just have a bunch of nihilism. And so the only way to hedge your bet against nihilism is to be hubristic. It's really weird, but it's what people do. And even you see this a lot with the IQ distribution on the ends of that bell curve. You see it more with really smart people and people who are less intelligent. You really do. So once you start getting above like the, what is it, 128, anything above 128, maybe it's 130, is in the 2% of the IQ range, meaning, you're in the second percentile, meaning that if you're in a room of 100 people, you're going to be smarter than everyone but two. Grossly speaking, right? And it works the same as those below, I think, 90 or so. So on those distributions, those tail ends, it gets really, really thin out there. And that's generally when people get to be more and more hubristic, in my experience. There are definitely people in the middle there, in that middle of that bell curve, that are not that bright either. And in that 100 average range, well, 98 in the United States at least, up until the 110-ish area, or that, down to the 90 area. You will find that there are some people that are hubristic, but most people are just like, I don't know, I don't care, going about their lives, right? It's interesting. It's very interesting to me. He's perfectly sincere in his announcement that Homo Marxian proposes to become the ultimate governor and god of the earth and then the universe. Under the impact of such sweeping theoretical ambitions, many non-Marxists have been caught in the emotional tide of this ideological fantasia, and have allowed themselves to be carried along in the current toward the shores of what they hope would be a promised land of man-made godliness. However, in recent years, a growing number of these pilgrims have risked life itself and come back to reality. Each one returns with the same story. Homo Marxian was founded to behave exactly like the graduate creature from the jungle which he believes himself to be. He regards all others with fearful suspicion and responds to each problem as though his very existence were at stake. Although he demands the right to rule humanity, he disdainfully rejects the most basic lessons learned during thousands of years of human experience. So I want to go back to what he just said here. Now, those of you who watch me regularly know that I tell you that Marxism is actually the return to tribalism, and it is a regressive backwards step. And this is not hard to prove. This is anthropologically sound, and this is also sound within the fields of historical economics. People begin to trade with foreign tribes. They make alliances. As their skills improve and there's basically more goods, you start to get into more of a market exchange style economy. You then create an economy based on agriculture and that market exchange, and so on and so forth. It begins to grow. This is how it works. Marxism is literally the return to basic tribal hunter-gatherer style societies with an agrarian edge. And that's just not, it's not going to work, guys. In fact, I just showed you when we watched Heaven on Earth over the last few weeks that it doesn't work. And where it's tried, it's always abandoned. If it worked in any way, shape, or form, at some point in the last 4,000 years, it would have worked. The end. But this is also based on the stupid idea of the Rousseauian noble savage. And this is where he talks about that he's coming out of the jungle and he's suspicious of all other men. Well, you have to be at first with other tribes. You don't just trade for resources when resources are scarce to your mind. And the interesting thing is that Marxism makes resources more scarce than they ever possibly could be, while capitalism frees them up. But it's not just Marxism. It's any of these lefty revolutionary style ideas. It's these central control governments. So I don't even just want to say Marxism, because I always say Marxism is the one side, or communism, that is, the one side of the coin of socialism. The other side is just fascism. I would say, currently, as it stands, the Marxist communist regime in China is a fascistic regime. But you have to understand the economic systems behind this, which is why I read to you The Vampire Economy, or for the first few chapters of it. And when I talk about America being a fascist nation, I mean that technically. I don't mean that like lefties do. I mean that as in that we have a centralized, controlled plan economy with some freedom. But the government has far more control than most of you realize. And we definitely are not a free market economy, guys. Just because we have a large portion of our market that is free, it's not free when you have a centralized bank. That is part of the 10 planks of communism. See, how am I doing on time? About an hour. Been doing this? Okay. We'll keep going, guys, a little bit for this, and then I'll read to you some of the politics of political servitude. It is in this historical crisis that man finds himself today. Hold on. I think I missed that last part there. Returning pilgrims bear one witness. Homo Marxian has reversed the direction of history. He has turned man against himself. Well, yeah, he has reversed the direction of history. He wants to go backward instead of civilization. He wants Rousseauian's noble savage. That, in part, is all of this climate change stuff. And it's also to get people together to wish to bring about that one world government. Interestingly, there was something I saw earlier today. I guess I'll have to bring it up again later. That sprung to mind. It was talking specifically about that. It was Sky News in Australia, and talking about plans for this, for how the Australian government was being totalitarian, and how they were planning with the UN on their urban development and continuing the propping up of their cities. And I keep telling you guys this. It's implicit. It's not explicit, but it's implicit in their text. They want everybody in cities. They don't want them in the countrysides. They want industrialized, computerized farming. They want all the people out of the countrysides for the most part. They don't want people to have rural lifestyles, because that means that they can live outside of the system. The cities are the means of control. And this has always been the way, folks. Always. This goes back through to ancient history. This is why city-states were the first major bodies of government in all of societies, and all societies rising throughout history. Always starts with a city-state. And it's why, again, Nimrod is mentioned first in the Bible, because Babylon was the first city-state. It is in this historic crisis that man finds himself today. Marxist man could not have come upon the earth at a more illogical time, in an age when technology advances have finally made it feasible to adequately feed, clothe, and house the entire human race. Marxist man stands as a military threat to this peaceful achievement. Again, this was written in the 1950s, so the height of the Cold War. Let's see here. His sense of insecurity drives him to demand exclusive control of human affairs in a day when nearly all the people would like to create a genuine United Nations dedicated to world peace and worldwide prosperity. That I do not want. But the United Nations has never been anything more than a pipe dream of globalist elites, people like Cecil B. Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholars, same people who also propped up Zionism, the people that have brought us into the alliance back into the English crown and this one world government, guys, that we technically live under. And if you don't think so, start looking at what the world government talks about in environmental policies, what the World Economic Forum's talking about, and how we're building back better right now, according to both Joe Biden and his climate czar. Oh, good Lord, what's his name? The freaking skull and bones guy that I can't stand. Anyways, you guys should know. I don't have to be perfect. Let's keep moving. Although man can travel faster than sound and potentially provide frequent, intimate contacts between all cultures and all people, Marxist man insists on creating iron barriers behind which he can secretly work. Marxist man makes no secrets of his ultimate objectives. He is out to rule the world because Homo Marxian is still an adolescent. He knows he cannot devour the whole human race in one greedy gulp. Therefore, he must be satisfied with one chunk at a time. As we shall see later, he has adapted an orderly timetable of conquest, which he is following with a deadly fixation. According to communist prophecy, time is running out on the free world. This dilemma leaves the unconquered portion of frightened humanity with only three possible courses of future action. They can merely capitulate, which is what most people will do because they're cowards. They can try to coexist. That's not possible because the Marxist will come after you. And they can set about to pull the blistering bully down. And that is the answer. And the only way, now, this is based in my faith, but the only way to do this is through defeating their arguments and allowing people to slowly be de-brainwashed. And I want to use their terms, re-education, which is literally brainwashing. But to fall away from these things, and many people do, over time, eventually. They see how destructive it is, and they often have mental breaks. They have a fracturing, a schism in their mind that brings them down to nothing, and then they realize how wrong they've been all this time, and that they were just going along with this belief like a zombie. Often, though, it's too late. Solzhenitsyn talks about this very much in the Gulag Archipelago, because he was this way. And you can't indoctrinate people. This, again, as I always say, goes back to the biblical principle of do not cast your pearls before swine. This is why often, too, guys, I will prop up bigger YouTubers who I may not fully agree with, but they're doing their part. And you cannot be so critical on so many of these people because they are helping to bring people out of this mindset. And they really are. I was at I think we'll start here tomorrow. I was at a party this weekend because my niece just graduated as well as my daughter. But my niece was had been taking college classes for the last 2 years or year and a half, whatever it's been. And she's going to be going to Boston College, so she's going to a pretty good prestigious school and all that. Her family can afford to do all that. But I'm there, and a lot of the people are older, like my parents' age. You know, they're in their 60s or 70s, and the stuff that they talk about is meaningless to me. And not all of it. Like, I want to hear about them and if they're doing well and all those things, but so many people just are caught up in things that are just absolutely petty and the minutia and talking about themselves and their jobs and their coworkers. And how does that edify anybody? It's small talk, and I can small talk, guys, but what is that actually doing? They're out there, they're having this get together. And guys, I'm not trying to be harsh and criticizing them. I'm just saying everyone's happy, it's a good time. And what's going on in the rest of the world. And some of these people are the same people that believe that, black people are being hunted down disproportionately and whatever else, yet don't know that the majority of the mass shootings that are happening in our cities are happening every weekend in our cities, in those black communities, by black folk. But they believe in this white supremacy narrative and all these other crazy things that they believe in. That's absolutely absurd. I have a hard time with that stuff, man. And it's like, there's nothing here I can actually talk to. Most of the people aren't religious. Can't talk to them about religion. Can't talk to them about faith. I could sit around with my dad and talk about that. He was there. My mom, my wife. I mean, my sister and brother-in-law, they go to church, but they don't talk about those things. So it's just one of those things that saddens my heart often. I end up thinking about it, and it's just really not. It's not cool that people are like this, and our world is so messed up, and you can't even. And the other problem I have with it is you usually can't even talk to them. You usually can't even address the deprogramming. You can't say, hey, what you believe is actually a completely false, fake narrative. It's total propaganda based in lies. And here's the actual data. They won't listen. They won't. They can't. And it's a really sad thing. It breaks my heart. It really does. Let me see if I can find the Sky News thing real quick. I don't know what segment it was. Or when it. I know it's not that old. But it was talking about the totalitarianism and going on in Australia right now. And man, is it bad. I don't even know where it's at. When did I watch this? Did I watch this today or yesterday? I don't even know. So many videos. But all right, well, no biggie. No biggie. Let's do some chat real quick. Although I haven't seen a lot of chat going on YouTube's. Shelly says you can't take the blue-pilled people, or can't talk to the blue-pilled people. It just makes them think you are ignorant. Yeah, and as I often explain here, they are literally the ignorant ones. They're suffering from Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the scientifically studied effect that people believe that they know more than they actually do to a certain point. Usually people who are ignorant of a subject, they believe that they have very little knowledge of it. Then they gain just a slight knowledge of it, and then they think that they're an expert. And the more knowledge they gain, the more expertise they get, the less and less they believe that they have expertise, because they understand that there's a larger scope in the field. And most people operate this way unconsciously. People like to feel important. When I'm in situations like that, I'll talk to people and do the small talk, but often I just don't say anything. And I'm a talkative guy. I like the conversation. Obviously, you guys know I can't shut up, right? But you wouldn't even recognize me. If you met me in any other context outside of that, you would see that I'm a very friendly, engaging individual. And with those things, I'm like sitting around with my wife or my daughter, talking to very few people because I just don't know what to talk about. I really don't. I don't want to offend anybody. I try to bring up things sometimes, but you don't want to ruin someone's party either. So there's a certain amount of respect to be given. But yes, you can't wake people up who aren't willing to be woken up. So guys, I left off here. With the politics of obedience. And just as a reminder, this was written in the 1570s or something like that. So quite old. But this was during the Renaissance, of course. The Reformation was coming about. And also a lot of new kind of political beliefs on allowing people to be free. This is basically the birth of classical liberalism in part of this era. That's why if you read Machiavelli from around the same time, you'll kind of understand that he was being frank about how politics actually work, but that wasn't a political treatise of how he thought politics should work, per se. And you'd have to read some stuff he wrote about or said about it around that. But in any case, it says the only Spartans who could give such an answer. This is, need I remind you that we went over a little bit about the Spartans. This goes back to the movie 300, of course, the Battle of Thermopylae, that is at the Hot Gates, where the small group of Spartans held off the Persians, and they did this to save all of the Greek city-states. And so we just were going over a little bit of that. And I'm not going to rehash that because I have to go too far back. But it says, Cato the Juncan, while still a child under the rod, could come and go in the house of Cilia and deposit. Because of the place of and family of his origin, and because he and Cilia were close relatives, the door was never closed to him. He always had his teacher with him when he went there, and was the custom for children of noble birth. He noticed that in the house of Cilia, in the dictator's presence or at his command, some men were imprisoned and others sentenced. One was banished, another was strangled. One demanded the goods of another citizen, another his head. In short, all went there, not as to the house of a city magistrate, but as to the people's tyrant. And this was therefore not a court of justice, but rather a resort of tyranny. Let me ask you folks, aside from the potential manslaughter charge, because I could see how that could go either way, do you think Derek Chauvin went to a court of justice or to a resort of tyranny? What will Kyle Rittenhouse get? We had two teen girls in D.C. hijack a car and kill a man. Just recently, one was sentenced. She's a minor. She will be released when she's 21. Do you think Kyle Rittenhouse will be given such leniency? Whereupon the young lad said to his teacher, "Why don't you give me a dagger? I will hide it under my robe. I often go into Cilia's room before he is risen, and my arm is strong enough to rid the city of him." There is a speech truly characteristic of Cato. It was a true beginning of this hero so worthy of his end. And should one not mention his name or his country, but state merely the fact as it is, the episode itself would speak eloquently, and anyone would divine that he was a Roman born in Rome at the time when she was free. And why all this? Certainly not because I believe that the land or the region has anything to do with it, for in any place and in any climate, subjugation is bitter, and to be free is pleasant. But merely because I am of the opinion that one should pity those who at birth arrive with the yoke upon their necks. We should exonerate and forgive them, since they have not seen even the shadow of liberty. And this is what's going on in our society, our societies in the West. We've all been under the yoke and burden of the leftist for over 100 years. We aren't in free societies. You need to get rid of that false notion. You may live somewhat freely, but if you were in a free society, there would not have been the restrictions and lockdowns that we had suffered this past year. And some areas are still suffering. We should exonerate and forgive them, since they have not seen even the shadow of liberty, and being quite unaware of it, cannot perceive the evil endured through their own slavery. If there were actually a country like that of the Sumerians mentioned by Homer, that's also, by the way, folks, the same ancient group that what's his name, Robert E. Howard wrote Conan about. And it says right here on the footnote, Sumerians were a barbarian people active north of the Black Sea in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, and gave their name to Crimea, I guess. So it says, where the sun shines otherwise than on our own, shedding its radiance steadily for 6 successive months, and then leaving humanity to drowse in obscurity until it returns at the end of another half year. Should we be surprised to learn that those born during this long night do grow so accustomed to their native darkness that unless they were told about the sun, they would have no desire to see the light? This would be the same with anyone living in the Arctic Circle, right? Many people do. One never pines for what he has never known. Longing comes only after enjoyment and constitutes, amidst the experience of sorrow, the memory of past joy. It is truly the nature of man to be free and to wish to be so, yet his character is such that he instinctively follows the tendencies that his training gives him. So essentially, what can we say of this other than people are born into this? They just accept it. It's how the system goes. They hear it on the news. They read it in the newspaper. They hear celebrities say it. And it's like their minds never can conceive that I live in a free country isn't a reality. They can't conceive that because they've just been telling the lie over and over again. America hasn't been a free country since the Civil War. Now, it was largely free after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, though the Democrats held a weak hand in the federal government because the Reconstructionists were primarily Republicans. But then, as we reached more and more freedom, some of those things got settled. The Democrats came in. Not all of them were Democrats, but the majority were, and started implementing progressive policies that would re-enslave the people. See, Sam says, to put a different spin on it, this is what the kids who grow up wearing masks, right, good one, yep. Or one who already grew up after 9/11. Yeah, you're right, Sam. Yeah, and it's funny because my wife is 11 years younger than I am, and, I'm 40, for those of you who don't know, despite my youthful good looks. But my wife was still like in school, or I don't know, elementary school or something. It's weird to think about. Now it's different because she's in her late 20s and whatever. Of course, we're having a baby together, for those of you who know that. But she was like in elementary school or middle school during 9/11, like early. And I was a Marine. Had already been in the Marine Corps for a while. In fact, I have a meritorious mass back here from 9/11. I was actually given a boy pat on the shoulder for my duty during that time period, during that day. So, yeah, it's interesting. Tim Pool's talked about this on his IRL podcast when he said like Vosh come on, Voldemort as I usually refer to him. So I slipped up there. Sorry. We'll never say the name again. Voldemort came on. Another one was what's his name? Hunter Avalon, who lives near me. I mean, he's out in Frederick, Maryland. And I used to watch Hunter on occasion, mostly for yucks, but he says stupid stuff, man. He thinks he's clueless. He's brainwashed, thinks that leftism that Nazism's right wing. And it's like, nope. Revolution wasn't right wing, isn't right wing, so no. Centralized government, not right wing. It's a left wing tenet. The manipulation and molding of humanity. And this is in comparison in the timeline too, because at the time, right wing would have meant laissez-faire, classical liberalism. Now, the Weimar Republic wasn't quite that. They were pretty degenerate, but Austria was. which is why Ludwig von Mises saved basically their nation from hyperinflation. All right, so I got on a bunch of asides there, but yeah. He's saying about basically you don't long for things that you never know. It's true. It works this way as well with sin. You do something wrong or evil. The first time you do it, it makes you feel bad, and over time it becomes easy. And it actually weakens your ability to do good because you get removed so far from it. You don't even understand what good is anymore. It corrupts the soul, folks. And a weak society, a society that's too soft, and we're too rich, we have too much luxury. I'm not saying that we need to reject all this stuff, but I think that we focus too much inwardly on ourselves instead of to the greater cause in the community. So as this happens, this enslavement happens. And it's a decadence that is happening. And again, as I often say, it fosters libertinism, which is what Marxist-style tyrants want, because they don't want you to be adults. They want you to be infantilized. They want you to have no consequences for your actions. And therefore, anyone saying, let's say, like Jordan Peterson, there are consequences to your action, and your rights are my responsibility, and vice versa, they hate that. They hate responsibility. It does not allow the hedonism. And in the end, it doesn't allow the tyranny from the top. Orwell got this right in 1984 pretty well. Let us therefore admit that all those things to which he is trained and accustomed seem natural to a man that is truly native to him, which he receives with his primitive, untrained individuality. Thus, custom becomes the first reason for voluntary servitude. Men are like handsome racehorses who first bite the bit and later like it, and rearing under the saddle, a while soon learn to enjoy displaying their harnesses and prance proudly beneath the trappings. This is what a gladiator in the day would have been, right? Back in the day, they would have been like, no, I don't want to fight, most likely. But they had to fight. And then eventually, as they get good and they get all the glory and they get thrown all the beautiful women, because that's actually, the gladiators were treated pretty well, guys. They were actually the ones that were good and survived. They weren't always killed, by the way. But the ones that survived, they were pampered. They were thrown women. They were bred with women for fine stock because people treated other people like human cattle back in the day. I mean, that's centuries old. This idea that, African slavery is the worst thing ever. Have you delved into the history of slavery and the fact that it still goes on today? And the lefties too, that like all the immigration, like to ignore the slavery going on with the sex trafficking on that issue. But that doesn't happen, despite their own organizations reporting that it happens to 80% of women on their travels here to the U.S. But I digress. Similarly, men will become accustomed to the idea that they have always been in subjugation, that their fathers lived in the same way. They will think they are obliged to suffer this evil and will persuade themselves by example and imitation of others. Finally, investigating those who order them around with the proprietary rights based on the idea that it has always been that way. And this mindset, this slavery mindset, this master-slave morality, as Nietzsche put it, is exactly what the forces of evil in our country and our government here in the United States have done to the black community. They've literally, the Democrats specifically, have infantilized them to the point where they think that there is no hope except for under the auspiciousness of the government. And it's just so twisted and disgusting. It really is. There are always a few, better endowed than others, who feel the weight of the yoke and cannot restrain themselves from attempting to shake it off. These are the men who never become tamed under subjugation and who always, like Ulysses on the land and sea, constantly seek the smoke of his chimney, cannot prevent themselves from peering about for their natural privileges and from remembering their ancestors and their former ways. This would be men like me, men like you, or ladies as well. That is what this is talking about, of course. But this also reminds me of, if you go back and you read Aristotle, if you read the Aristotle's on politics, and he talks about the nature of slavery and the nature of people being slaves, and that there's some slaves you have to break because they just don't understand that they're slaves. It's a really interesting insight into the mind of the day. And people thought that, if you were conquered people, you were inferior, therefore you deserve to be slaves. If I could come in, if I could go into my neighbor's house and take them over, they must be inferior to me because I'm strong and have combative skills, and obviously I can murder you. So I did you a favor by just making you my slave. Could have taken your life. That's sort of how the ancients thought about it. And so, like, again, this idea that all the excuses of superiority and racism and whatever else that happened in the modern world under colonialism and the slave trade then, absolutely, utterly the same mentalities that were written about thousands of years ago. Nothing has changed, folks. There's nothing new under the sun. These are in fact the men who, possessed of clear minds, the far-sighted spirit, are not satisfied, like the brutish mass, to see only what is at their feet, but rather look about them, behind and before, and even recall the things of the past in order to judge those of the future and compare both with the present condition. These are the ones who, having good minds of their own, have further trained them by study and learning. Even if liberals had entirely perished from the earth, such men would invent it. If liberals, my mistake, guys, my dyslexia there. If liberty had entirely perished from the earth, such men would invent it. Right, because liberty is in the soul. It's not in anything else. It doesn't come from above. I mean, I would say it actually does come from above through Christ, but that's a different kind of liberty. For them, slavery has no satisfaction, no matter how well disguised. The Grand Turk was well aware that books and teachings, more than anything else, give men the sense of comprehending their own nature and to detest tyranny. So what do? You restrict the books, right? Again, guys, this was written in the 1500s. What did the fascists do? What did the communists do? Part of the fall of the Soviet Union was the fact that they allowed the free press and the books that were banned before. I understand that in his territory there are few educated people, for he does not want many. On account of this restriction, men of strong zeal and devotion, who in spite of the passing of time have preserved their love of freedom, still remain ineffective because, however numerous they may be, they are not known to one another. Amen. That's why I'm here, to make us known to one another. That is one reason, at least, to build communities. Because I'm going to go live off in the woods, in the mountains, and hopefully some of you are coming with me so we can build our own communities and preserve what is good in this world. And there ain't much, folks. There ain't much good in this world. On account of this restriction, men of strong zeal and devotion, who in spite of the passing of time have preserved their love for freedom, still remain ineffective because, however numerous they may be, they are not known to one another. Under the tyrant, they have lost freedom of action, of speech, and almost of thought. Also, again, this points to social media and what they are doing. Nigeria blocked Twitter because Twitter condemned Nigeria for some things. They've been going back and forth for a while. And then Twitter said, we're really disappointed that Nigeria won't stand up for free speech and allowing our platform. And it's like, are you kidding me, Twitter? Could you be any less self-aware? Oh, they're aware, folks. They're very aware. It's not that at all. It's that they're hypocrites and actors, and they're all about power. That's what that's about. Under the tyrant, they have lost freedom of action, of speech, of almost of thought. They are alone in their aspiration. Indeed, Momus, god of mockery, was not merely joking when he found this to criticize that the man fashioned by Vulcan, namely, that the Maker had not set a little window in his creature's heart to render his thoughts visible. It is reported that Brutus, Cassius, and Casca, on undertaking to the free Rome, and for the matter, the whole world, refused to include in their band Cicero, that great enthusiast for the public welfare, if even there was one, because they considered his heart too timid for such a lofty deed. They trusted his willingness, but they were none too soon of his courage. Well, I don't know about Brutus. It's been a long time since I've read the play Julius Caesar or the actual account. I actually had to translate this from Latin when I was a teen, but I don't remember like any of my Latin. So, but yeah, the famous quote, "Et tu, Brute," and you, Brutus, you too, you as well. You're also going to stab me. Brutus thought he was saving the Republic, but he had to betray a dear friend. Yet whoever studies the deeds of earlier days and the annals of antiquity will find practically no instance of heroes who failed to deliver their country from evil hands when they set about the task with a firm, wholehearted, and sincere intention. And again, folks, these things mentioned here are classical literature. You guys don't know them because your education has been obfuscated with a bunch of propaganda nonsense. You don't even learn proper history. You get told FDR propped up America and kept us out of the Great Depression being as bad as it was. Nonsense. Absolute utter BS. FDR not only prolonged the Depression, but he made it worse, just like Obama in the 2008 market crash. And hey, we're about to do it again because Joe Biden wants to introduce legislation that's going to allow black entrepreneurs and anyone not to be discriminated and get loans. The exact same thing they did under the subprime mortgage market, giving people making $60,000 a year, $250,000, $300,000, $500,000 loans who couldn't make their mortgage with variable rate mortgages. Like, that's not going to be a disaster. They're doing it on purpose, guys. Trust me. They are trying to bring down the system. And most of you are too, maybe not you listeners out there, but when I say you, I'm saying, the royal you or we, that whole thing, right? The general population are too dumb to have any clue what's going on. And it's like that party I was at. Let's celebrate this thing. And again, I'm not against that. But let's just have all this small talk and blah, blah, blah. And no one is concerned about reality. And these same folks are going to be coming to certain people's doorsteps saying, it's horrible here. Oh, the inflation. Oh, no, the callings, the mass incarcerations, all this stuff's going on. How did this happen? Why didn't we see this happening? You didn't see it happen because you didn't listen to the people telling you it was going to happen. You called us conspiracy theorists. You called us crazy. You called us all kinds of things, and you ignored the very essence of human nature itself in the history, the thousands of years of recorded history that we have of how we act and how we go about things. You ignored the psychology. You ignored the true science. And you ignored, finally, and most importantly, the Word of God. As Solzhenitsyn said, men have forgotten God, and this is why all this was allowed to happen. Liberty, as if it too reveal her nature, seems to have given them new strength. Harmodius and Arigistion. This is the only reason not to read classics, is to try to pronounce people's names. Thyres Bulbus, Brutus the Elder, Valerius, and Dion achieved successful what they plan virtuously. Sorry, guys. My brain's dyslexic really bad today. My Akel Sid is on point, guys. Excuse me. You know me, though. I'm hit or miss with that. So for for the wording and structure of this text, it does make it hard for me. Which is why, if you might have noticed last week when I started reading Bastiat's The Law, it was much more fluent in general. For hardly ever does good fortune fail a strong will. Brutus the Younger and Cassius were successful in eliminating servitude. And although they perished in their attempt to restore liberty, they did not die miserably. What blasphemy it would be to say that there was anything miserable about these men, either in their death or in their living. Their loss worked great harm, everlasting misfortune, and complete destruction of the Republic, which appears to have been buried with them. Other and later undertakings against the Roman emperors were merely plottings of ambitious people who deserve no pity for the misfortunes that overtook them, for it is evident that they sought not to destroy, but merely to usurp the crown, scheming to drive away the tyranny, but to remain tyranny. See, to drive away the tyrant, but to retain tyranny. Yeah. See, I would have worded this to drive away the tyranny, but to become or remain the tyrant. But this is the stuff, like I said, my brain wants to fill this in, and that's why it's confusing to me. I don't, not utterly confusing, but I'm hoping I'm reading this clearly and articulately well enough for you to follow along and not making this unintelligible. But yes, this is what happens. This is why I am not, will never be a fan of monarchy, will never prop it up most likely. You're going to have to give me a ton of evidence otherwise, because this is actually what happens. This is what happens from the beginning. The first monarchy in Israel that God put into place was Saul, and he got jealous and thought David was going to take over his kingdom after he married off his daughter to David. And then he went to hunt him down until him and his son finally died. And then David came in, and then two of his sons tried to overthrow his kingdom during his reign. While David also murdered a man because he wanted his wife. No. He might have been competent outside of those things, sure. Not really a great reign. I'll take my little community over all of that. Thank you. It says, for myself, I could not wish such men to prosper, and I am glad they have shown by their example that the sacred name of liberty must never be used to cover false enterprise. But to come back to the thread of our discourse, which I have practically lost, the essential reason why men take orders willingly is that they are born serfs and are reared as such. Yes, education. If you teach someone that they are a slave, they will remain a slave. This was part of the slave system in the American South. It's part of that was propped up by the Democrats, by the way, and it's part of the system that is now still propped up by the Democrats, that the people in the inner cities, the black folks, are still slaves to the system. They are, 100%. As Candace Owens puts it, they're part of the plantation. They are. This is a metaphysical, that is first principles argument. It is what they are, folks. They are tied to it. It is their only savior. They see no way out of it themselves. Now, obviously, not every black person or everyone in the black community, but all these black leaders trying to prop it up. Mind you, all those black leaders get rich while the community stays poor. Funny how that happens. They're all a bunch of tyrants, folks. That's all they are. But to come back to the thread of our discourse, which I have particularly lost, the essential reason why men take orders willingly is that they are born serfs and are reared as such. From this cause, there follows another result, namely, that people easily become cowardly and submissive under tyrants. For this observation, I am deeply grateful for Hippocrates. the renowned father of medicine, who noted and reported it in a treatise in his entitled Concerning Diseases. This famous man was certainly endowed with a great heart and provided it clearly by his reply to the great king, who wanted to attach him to his person by means of special privileges and large gifts. Hippocrates answered frankly that it would be a weight in his conscience to make use of his science for the cure barbarism who wished to slay his fellow Greeks, or to serve faithfully by his skills anyone who undertook to enslave Greece. The letter he sent to the king can still be read amongst the other works and will forever testify to his great heart and noble character. So let's go over that again real quick. It says, the famous man was certainly endowed with a great heart and provided it clearly with his response to the king. It says, who wanted to attach him to his persons by means of special privileges and large gifts, meaning the king was going to give him, rank and power. And he basically was like, nope, that's not correct. And by this time, it should be evident that liberty once lost, valor also perishes. A subject people shows neither gladness nor eagerness in combat. True. It's almost like the Russians in World War II had to be forced to go fight, or they would be shot if they ran away. That kind of stuff. Its people march suddenly to danger, almost as if in bonds, and stultified. They do not feel throbbing within them that eagerness for liberty which engenders scorn of peril and imparts readiness to acquire honor and glory by brave death amidst one's comrades. Well, I don't try to glorify war, folks, but I will say this, that though it's against my religious beliefs, I would probably become a violent man if someone attacked my pregnant wife right now. Right? Because that would impart a deep visceral reaction that my daughter would be hurt, that my wife would be hurt, and, I might end up going to jail in such a case. But the point is that when you are a slave, what passion do you really have to preserve or protect anything? Unless you're the slave that holds the other slaves in subjugation, and you are favored, like here above, with the special privileges given to Hippocrates from the king. Among free men, there is no competition as to whom will do most, each for the common good, each by himself, all expecting to share in that misfortunes of defeat or in the benefits of victory. But an enslaved people loses in addition to its warlike courage. All signs of enthusiasm for their heart are degraded, submissive, and incapable of any great deed. Tyrants are well aware of this, and in order to degrade their subjects further, encourage them to assume this attitude and make it instinctive. See how much more of this I have. I'm on page 62. Yeah, I have a bit more before we get to another section. Ooh, Xenophon, the great historian. Thinking about a lot of ancient history here. In any case, I will come back to this tomorrow, guys. It just is beneficial that I go ahead and stop. I could go another 20 minutes or so, but I also could probably stand to get dinner together and other things. So let me write that down. And we will return to this more tomorrow. This won't be long to get through. We're on page 62. There are 80 pages of this. And remember the first, 30 pages where freaking Murray Rothbard going off about this treatise, which is fine. I don't hate Rothbard, but I just find his anarcho-capitalistic ideas quite utopian, even though I think if human beings were a moral species, that it would be potentially possible. The problem lies in that we're not. And then the worst part of it is that Rothbard himself was an atheist, so nothing he says makes any sense. But he's got pretty sound economics. So I'll give him that. I only got 3 of you viewing me still, at least according to the YouTube stream. That's fine. We have been streaming for a while. You know, people are getting off work and whatever else. But I will be back tomorrow, guys. We got 2 over on Entropy. Nothing on DLive today. I will get back to you guys, though. Like 100%. I will get back to this tomorrow. I just don't know about the rest of the week. So maybe I'll stream early. I thought about some of the stuff I want to talk about streaming early in the morning. Some different stuff. It's kind of really a matter of the stuff I do when I get up, how quickly I get it done. I'm basically slow to get to work in the morning. It usually takes me about an hour and a half before I start getting stuff done. I need to drink coffee. I need to wake up a little bit. I usually either read scriptures or watch a little bit of news. And then, you know, then you got to do like the whole shower thing, and you know, it is what it is. And I'm going to try and start working out again in the morning as well, or at least throughout the day, but in the morning. So we'll see. We'll see. But I am going with my wife on Wednesday to her appointment. That is the plan. Because the baby is due next week. Now, whether she arrives next week is a whole nother issue. I will be in DC with my wife to make sure that we are together because of this issue with the baby potentially coming soon, right? So I'm going to stay by her side instead of having to try and join her or her being in labor by herself. And if I can, I will stream through StreamYards or something. So we'll figure it out. Otherwise, guys, I'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern right here on All-1. If you weren't aware, you can go over to the other channel that I have. That is the Ends Justify the Memes. That show is Wednesdays at 7 p.m. This Wednesday, we will have our friend, special guest, Holly Midlife as the co-host. I said special guest, I meant special co-host, because Tank is on vacation. So go check us out then. With all that said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. This has been All-1. If you weren't aware, my name is Bill, and I wish you all well.